Well, hi guys, it's that time. It's our Bible teaching snippet of the day. Yesterday, as I closed out on my Bible teaching that I did, I kind of set a little hook for today's teaching. I ended with talking about that Luke 4:18 and our Bibles do not match the scripture in the Old Testament, and Jesus was reading from the Isaiah scroll, okay? It's actually Isaiah 61, verse 1 and 2, okay? And I said that we're, Jesus, so let me explain what I meant. Just let me start here. Jesus was reading from the Greek Septuagint, okay? And when we go back into our Bibles, like our King James and all the other offsprings that came downline from the Latin Vulgate, okay? The Latin Vulgate was translated to Latin and then into other languages. Jesus was reading the Greek Septuagint of that scripture, okay, in the Isaiah scroll. Now, what I meant by that, I'm just going to show you that in Luke 4:18. It also tells us that Jesus would, what's in there is that Jesus would restore the sight to the blind. And if you go back into our Bibles and look up 61:1, it doesn't really say that. So I'm just going to read it to you, even in the expanded Bible, which is kind of an offspring of the King James. It's just a more expanded version, giving you the deeper meanings of some words so you can mine out more of Scripture. I'm just going to read it out of the expanded Bible, okay? The Lord has put His Spirit in me because the Lord has appointed me or anointed me, both words are there, to tell and bring the good news to the poor. He has sent me to comfort, bind up those whose hearts are broken, to tell the captives they are set free, and to tell the prisoners they are released. Now, if you noticed, Isaiah 61, 1 does not say to give sight to the blind. But let's go over to the Greek Septuagint, which is what Jesus was quoting from. And he says, "And the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because He has anointed me. He has sent me to preach glad tidings to the poor, to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and recovery of sight to the blind." So what you see here is in the Greek Septuagint, Jesus quoted it pretty much word for word, because that would be the scrolls that he was using as he read. But in our Bibles, the recovery of the sight to the blind is not in our Isaiah scriptures. And that's what I was talking about yesterday as I closed. So let me keep digging a little bit deeper today. That's what I wanted to talk about. And that's just another example of some differences in the Greek Septuagint and the Latin Vulgate Old Testament, which is generally, our Bibles are downline versions of the Latin Vulgate. Okay. Now look, a lot of these changes don't necessarily change our doctrines or anything major, but when it comes to things like hell and total reconciliation or restoration of all things, those words like hell, judgment, punishment, everlasting torment, and those kind of words, that absolutely does change church doctrine, and on a personal level, it changes our trust level with God. Okay, and that's why it's so important that we understand what the original scriptures said and what the earliest, going back to Jesus and the original apostles, what they believed and what they taught, along with the early church for the first 5 centuries prior to St. Augustine. I'm going to talk about him, getting some of his mixed views and religions from some pagan, 2 of them, pagan religions before he converted to Catholicism. So let me get started today, and I've got a couple of things I want to read to you, and I've got some notes written down. So I want to make sure I say this. The word Septuagint means 70, okay? So when they call it the Greek Septuagint, that meant then that it was the Greek version of the Hebrew scriptures, okay? It was the translated into Greek by the 70 Hebrew and Greek scholars that knew both languages inside and out, and they were moving it out of the Hebrew, dying and passing away language into the new language that was becoming popular for most of the people groups. Now, Jerome felt like the 70 who were Hebrew and Greek scholars did not do a good job translating the Greek Septuagint. That the 70 scholars who lived during the time of the actual Hebrew and Greek languages were inept in 70 men, 70 that knew both languages, could not translate the Bible accurately, and he took it upon himself to go back and retranslate, not from the Greek Septuagint, okay, but from one set of incomplete Hebrew scriptures, Hebrew manuscripts is what I should say, Hebrew manuscripts that was in Bethlehem. Now, I want to make sure I say this. Jerome's native birth language was not Hebrew, nor was it Greek. His native born, what he raised from the crib, knowing and understanding and speaking, was Latin. And he went to school to learn Hebrew and Greek. Now, who do you think would know the Hebrew and Greek better? 70 men who lived in the day that knew both languages, scholars nonetheless, or one man, almost 600 years later, who had to learn those languages at a school. That's why I trust the Greek Septuagint over the Latin Vulgate offspring Bibles for the Old Testament. Okay, now yesterday I want to correct myself. I said that there were 4 letters written between Jerome and St. Augustine, where he was correcting Augustine in Rome, was sending letters saying, hey, why are you varying from the scriptures that we know we can trust, that was handed down to us by the 70 scholars, okay, by the 70, that's what he said, by the 70, that we know that we can trust what they have passed down to us. I want to make sure I clear this up. There were 4 letters specifically between the 2 men about him changing scripture. Total, what we have, or what the church has, is 11 letters between them, and they were always sparring and arguing with one another. I want to read you something that I read in an article about these disputes that went on. So let me just go ahead and read this, okay? In the boldest move of any letters, Augustine calls on Jerome to take up genuine and truly Christian severity with love to correct and amend that work, and sing, as they say, a Paleonian, whatever that is, that's an odd word, that is, issue a formal retraction of his previous position, and it gives the reference of where you can find that quote. However, roundabout or poetic composition, Augustine of Hippo has rebuked Jerome of Bethlehem. Let me read that one more time. However roundabout that Augustine went, or however poetic Augustine wrote this in his letter, Augustine of Hippo has rebuked Jerome of Bethlehem. Now, it's worthy of me saying that Augustine was in an entry-level priest position. Jerome was well known and had already climbed in the rankings of the Roman Catholic Church, and he was already a bishop. Now, I've covered that. Now, there's a couple other things. I said that I would post Acts, and I did yesterday, and then I also posted the link to the letters on my Facebook page as well. Now, let's see if I can find, I was going to talk to you a little bit about some scriptures where I talked about Jacob mourning until he got to his grave, or mourning till he goes to Sheol. Did you know that the Douay Rheims, or Douay Rheims, it depends on what area you're from, but that particular translation of English, the Douay Rheims, is actually the Latin Vulgate, as close as you're ever going to get to the English, okay? Did you know that it still says in its verse in Genesis 37:34, in the Douay Rheims, it does say that Joseph, he says, I'm going to go into hell. I'm going to hell. So the word hell is still in that translation. And I'm sorry, I was going to read you 2 or 3 different verses of different Bibles. Many of them say, into my grave. Some of them just say Sheol. Very few of them now say the word hell because they know that don't fit. Nobody's going to grieve themselves to hell because they're just going to grieve themselves until they die and go into the grave. So let me see. I think I've covered everything that I wanted to cover and make sure I cleaned up and move forward and talk to you a little bit more about the Greek Septuagint and the changes and different things like this. Now, what I want to do next is a friend of mine and I were going back and forth. Now, when I first started teaching complete restoration, I taught that hell was a mutated, twisted, blown out of proportion doctrine of what God does is He will judge. He will make a righteous judgment, and his judgments are not punitive where He puts people in prison just to be punishing them. No, His punishments or judgments will be retributive so that people are brought back to wholeness, okay? All right, so what we want is for people to be healed. We don't want to just throw them in prison and leave them broken in prison. We want them, yes, they need to pay for what they did, but they also need to be rehabilitated. That's what God is going to do, okay? He is going to make a judgment. He's going to correct people, but He will also purify them and rehabilitate and heal them. And that is what the early church taught for the first 5 centuries until St. Augustine put into the Catholic Church the doctrine of hell. Okay, so what I want to do though, this friend of mine, I'm going to use his first name because he said he didn't mind me using his last name, but he could really get persecution from other Christians as well as other church leaders that don't agree with what I'm teaching. So I'm not trying to hang anybody out to dry. So this guy named Tim and I, we've gone back and forth. So he did not really buy into so much. Well, it helped him with the teaching of hell, I think. But what really had a hard time accepting is that the church could teach something the opposite of what was true. So God's going to be angry, punish people. They're going to be in hell forever. And instead, God is going to correct them and rehabilitate them, purify them, and bring them back into completion or restitution or reconciliation with Him. And you know, if you think about it, Tim is right. It's right the opposite. We are not throwaways to God, no more than any child that you have ever had in your physical lifetime. You don't just judge a child and throw them in an oven and turn the heat up and leave them to burn in an oven for all eternity, on and on and on, while they're screaming and begging for mercy. No, my friends, as a loving parent, you will make a right judgment towards something they've done wrong, okay? You may even make them do things, okay, to make up for the damage they did to other people, but your goal in your heart is for that child to become a better person and for them to be restored back to you. So the end result is them to be made good people, good moral, good-hearted people, and restore them back to a right relationship with you. And God is no different. Look, we can't put our morals above God being moral. God is more moral than we are. Okay, let me read you, as I close today, I want to read you what Tim wrote to me. Faye, this is awesome, and I asked permission for me to quote him on this. He listened to this over and over again until it finally got in him, and he is like, now I get it, I get it, I get it, and I've been set so free of the lie of hell and that God doesn't love us and He's going to put us in hell and throw us away, that He really will restore all of us. And so he is so excited, and you got to get this in your heart. Listen to what this man wrote me. Faye, to build upon a statement you made in your video on 1/10, January the 10th, something was impressed upon me. Here it is. Jesus was 100% successful in receiving healing results. He was 100% successful in deliverance. He was even 100% successful in turning water into wine! Exclamation point. And of course, he was 100% successful at the whipping post and the cross. Drawing a conclusion from that, will he not also be 100% successful in saving each and every soul, and that none shall perish? He got 100% on every other thing he did. Why not with all the souls? Your thoughts, question mark. And I wrote him back and I told him, that's exactly right. God is powerful enough when it says that God wills that no man would perish. Do you really think that this mighty, mighty God of ours is not powerful enough and mighty enough to get what he wants? My friends, he will get what he wants. Listen, I'm going to close here today. I've gone a little long, but I wanted to share those things with you today. Tomorrow, I'm going to start on St. Augustine and give you some backdrop information about him and how he played his role in changing all of Christianity, just like Jerome did when he changed the Bible through his Latin Vulgate translation from the Greek, well, actually, from what was used as the Greek Septuagint, from some incomplete Hebrew manuscripts in Bethlehem. I love you, and I will see you here tomorrow. Bye-bye.